So now we have the employee list component rendering on the employees page. And the next step really is we have to create in the server project a web API to fetch the employee information, right? That way our client application can get access to that data and display it on the web page and in our components. So the next step is you're going to open up the server project. I'm just going to collapse these other projects so it's not confusing. You're going to open up the program CS, and this is like what the minimalist API looks like. So first things first. All right, so now we have, in a previous video, we created the database. So we got to add a database context. So to do this, we're going to add a new folder called data. And in this folder, we're going to add a new class. Right, you want to make sure you pick the class. And you could also do right-click and do new item, add new item. And then in this list, pick class. And I'm going to call this Nuno Solutions DB. This is kind of like the standard for database and entity framework database context. And we're going to add that. And there we go. So I am going to do something here though. I'm going to delete this. See, you can see, so we have a class called Nuno Solutions DB, and it's in a namespace called Nuno Solutions.server.data. That's because the server project is called Nuno Solutions Employees.server, and now our class that we've added is inside a data folder. So that's where the .data comes from. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to remove the .data here, just to make so I don't have to add hundreds of namespaces to my imports. And I am going to save this. So now the next step is we got to add entity framework, the entity framework NuGet package. So you want to right click your server. You want to go to manage NuGet packages. Go up to browse. And there you go. Okay. So you're going to want to add Microsoft Entity Framework Core. It's the first one. Accept. You're going to want to install Microsoft Entity Framework SQL Server, because the database we're going to use is SQL Server. And I think that's all we need for now. Yep. Okay. So let's close that. So the next step is to inherit from an Entity Framework class called DB context. Right. I think that's how you spelled it. DB context. Yeah. So then you'll see that they have these little squiggly lines because Visual Studio doesn't know where it is. But then when you put your mouse over it, you get this little, this little light bulb. Click on this little arrow. It will tell you. It will automatically suggest like fixes, right? And for some reason, it's not giving me the fix that I want. Let me see. There you go. Okay, so let's just do that again. It's going to add the namespace for you. I could have done that manually, but so when you put your mouse over this, you're going to want to click using Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and it'll add the namespace up here automatically. So that way, now when this turns green, right, you'll know that Visual Studio recognizes this object properly. So one thing I usually like to do is in the app settings file, in the server project, the app settings.json file, I like to add the database connection string in here. So you can do like connection strings, right? And then say Nuno Solutions DB. I like to name it the same as my database class, my DB context database class. And now in here, we want to create a connection string to our SQL Express database. So to do that, you have to know what the formats of database connection strings are. But I'll just do it here. So it's going to be server equals, and we're going to say .//SQL Express, right? Semicolon. And then it's going to be database. Just so you know, there's these connections. The server, this usually could also be data source, and then database could also be initial catalog. For older database connection strings, that's kind of how it used to be, but in newer connection strings, you could actually use this format, which is kind of cool. Makes it easier. So it's just Nuno so this is database is the database name. So I named mine Nuno Solutions. If you name yours something different, make sure you use the correct name. And we're going to say integrated security equals SSPI, which really just tells it to use Windows authentication. There's actually another way for the connection string. I believe there's another way to say to use Windows authentication, but I'm just going to leave it like this. The other thing I can do is, if I didn't want to use Windows authentication, I could actually use user ID equals, and I could put SA, which is the default user account that SQL Express creates for you, and then password equals, and whatever the password, your password is. I'm not going to do that here. We're going to use Windows authentication just because, to keep it simple. So in the shared library here, you can create a folder called services. And in this services folder, you can create a new class called config service. All right, and I always like to change this to public. I'm gonna delete this and just leave it under the shared namespace. Right, and now we're gonna create a constructor. If you type in CTOR and then press tab on your keyboard, it automatically creates a constructor for you. And we're gonna actually use iConfiguration. You're gonna want to install this package, Microsoft Extensions Configuration Abstractions. You just double click on here. It'll do it for you. It'll add the namespace up here, and then here you're gonna type in config. Since this is a private variable, you don't actually have to type private here. You know what I mean? By default, if you don't define it as public or internal, it's private. But I'll leave it as private just so you guys can see it. And now in here, I'm going to just inject an iConfiguration object here. Of course, you have to spell it correctly. And I'm just going to call this actually config like that. And then we're going to say config equals config, and that's it. So now this object will get automatically injected from dependency injection. And now what we can do here is create a public string. Basically, it's going to be a public property that will automatically fetch the connection string for us. Right, and then I mean, there's a shortcut here. You don't have to do this way in this version. In this version, you could do it like this. And then you could just say config, and in here, you're going to want to do. This is the path to the app settings. So this is in connection strings. I just copy and pasted it, colon, and then it's no solutions DB. Right. So now this connection string property will return to us the value from here, right? That way and you'll see how we're going to do it actually. This class is finished. Just save it. That's what we want for now. Let's go back into the Nuno Solutions DB context class, and in here we're going to override on configuring, right? This now. If you don't know what overriding is, basically this onConfiguring method exists in this object, in this class, and we're just overriding what it normally does by default. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say options, and Visual Studio is kind of cool. It kind of tells you, it kind of predicts what you're going to do. This is kind of a new AI feature in Visual Studio 2022. So now we're going to inject our configure service. I already had it copied and pasted into my clipboard. If you press Control period here, it'll bring this up automatically, and you just press enter, and it'll automatically add this using statement that's needed so that it can find this. Now that we have the configure service, it'll be injected by dependency injection. So here in this use SQL Server method, we're going to add configure service dot connection string. So now this property, this connection string property, will automatically pull from the app settings value here. That basically tells our database context class in the solutions DB to use this this connection string. So we're gonna have to test this. So now let's go into this program class, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna just get rid of this summaries array. We don't need that. Everything else up here you can leave for now. And we're also gonna get rid of this record class. It's not necessary. We're gonna repurpose this class here. We're gonna call this get employees, right? And we're gonna, within here, so now we have to add our services in the server project. So in this server project, you're gonna wanna go into this program CS file, and you're gonna wanna add your configure service as a scoped service, and you're gonna wanna add your database using this add DB context method to add your database context class. Right, and so this way dependency injection knows how to instantiate these and pass them into the constructors of our objects. So now in this get employees get method, we're going to actually pass in our Nuno Solutions DB for now as part of the, so dependency injection will inject that in there so we can use it. And before we can really use that, we have to add we have to actually define a class that represents this table here. So to do that, it's actually pretty easy. I'm gonna pull these up here side by side so it's easy to see. And in this data, we're gonna create a another folder here. This is gonna be a data model. So we'll add a new folder here called data models. You could put them in here, or you could technically put this folder right in the data models here, or you can actually just call it a models data models folder, and then in here you could add a new class. Make sure class is selected, and you're gonna set this to employees. Call it employee. I'm going to call this object an employee object. Again, I'm just going to make sure the namespace is just Nuno Solutions employees.server. And in here, we're going to start adding properties that represent the values in the table. So we're going to say, if you type in prop and press tab, it automatically creates a property for you. This property is, we're going to add emp ID, which is an integer, so we're leaving it as an int. And I just like to copy and paste usually. You can change this to a string. Varchars get represented as strings inside of, because it's text in C#. I'm going to call this first name. I'm going to call this last name. This one is going to be age. And you'll notice that these are all going to have, each column in the table is going to have a property basically. This is email. This is going to be phone. Phone, I'm just going to represent it as a string for now. And then this is going to be a date time. Created date. I'm going to create two more here. This is going to be higher date. Now we're going to put a little question mark in here next to the data type, the date and time data type. This tells .NET that this property is nullable. So we're going to do the same thing for termination date. And the last property is going to be employment status. Which will be a string. Save. So like you got these little squiggly lines because it doesn't know if it could be nullable or not. This is like a new thing in the new version of .NET. So phone is nullable. So this one will actually mark as nullable. But that's pretty much it. Everything else is required, so we'll leave it this way. save that. And now that we have an employee class that represents a record in our employees table, we got to add that as a database set property into our database class. So in here, we're going to say public db set employee. And I'm not going to explain every little thing about what this all does, because you can actually Google this and get this information, because it's already out there. The purpose of this is to show you how to actually build an entire application. I'm going to go through every single step and just kind of do it. And if you guys are not sure about some of these steps, you feel free to email me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right, so now we have a database context class. Database context class has an employees property that points to the employee class that has all the fields that represent the columns in the employees table, right? We also have this database context class in the Nuno Solutions DB using the connection string that's in our app settings.json, right? So now in here, we're gonna say, literally, just to make this really simple, we're gonna say db.employees.toList. We're literally gonna return all of them for now. There's only a few, so we're gonna create an employees variable. And that's it. We're literally that's all we're gonna return, and we're gonna save it. So now we want to test if this works. Test if this works, I use a program called Postman typically, but I'm not going to do that here. You guys can look up Postman if you want on your own. There's tons of videos on that as well. The other thing here is I'm just going to change this to get employees as well. You don't need this technically. You could just you do a app.mapGet, like that, and it works. But I'll leave this for now. All right, so now I believe this is the name that it appears in the Swagger generation tool. So like if I make this project, the server project, the startup project, and I run this, it should give me the Swagger web page that shows me what my APIs look like. Let's just see if it works. So here's what the Swagger utility kind of looks like. And so, okay, so you have a get employees, and actually you could test it with this, right? And you click try out, and then you click execute, and it should just, unless there's an issue. All right, so yeah, this is a common issue. So when you define an employee record or an employee class, that's a data model for your database, you have to tell Entity Framework what the key is, right? And so let's just stop this. Okay, so if we go into this employee class, you can add an attribute called key, like this. Right, you could put it right above the employee property, or you could actually even do it like this, right? Basically, this attribute is an attribute that's decorated for this employee property, but you see how it's giving you squigglies. So you want to press Control period, or press the little light bulb. And you're going to want to use this namespace, system.component.model.data annotations. Right, and I'm just going to put it like this for now. And now what this basically tells Entity Framework is that this employee ID is the primary key of the table. That's that's why it was complaining. So now let's run it again. Put it up on my other screen again. So let's test it out and see if we get another error or if it works. So data is null. This method or property cannot be called on null values. So this probably has to do something with the way now you have to mark your properties as null or not null, strictly. So let's go into this employee table. I believe that's what it is. And let's just look here. So we have an integer, so first name. So if you're not setting this in the construct, so I'm just gonna set these for now as nullable, so we don't get these errors. It's kind of annoying. There is a way to suppress these error messages. And this is kind of how sometimes you just have to troubleshoot your your applications. So as you can see now, it worked, right? It executes a curl command, which is just executes a web API. And you can see here the return code was 200, which is normal, right? Success. And you can see we got a JSON response containing the employee information. If you see here, you have a Nuno Pereira and you have a Marco Pereira. This is the data being pulled directly from the table, which we created earlier in the video. So our web API is successfully connecting to our database and successfully fetching the data that we created from the employees table. So now we want to call this web API to display it in our Blazor application, right? So let me close this up. So now we're going to go back in, we're going to close our server project and our shared, we'll leave our shared open. We're going to expand our client application as well. And we're going to work on the employee list component. So in this component, we're going to have to call the get employees web API to retrieve the list of employees. And then in this top area, that's in the code area. And in the top area here, we're going to actually output that data in a way that's presentable to the user. Let's do that. So in the component, you can override a couple different methods in Blazor. As an example, uninitialized, right, or on async, uninitialized async, right? And in these methods, that's where you want to fetch your data, right, from a web API. So you could inject HTTP into a Blazor. So first things first, we're going to inject HTTP client, and we're just going to call it HTTP. This basically tells this Razor component that we want the HTTP client and instance to be injected from dependency injection. That way we can access and call web APIs. So next step here is going to be, we're going to define a, when you really should create a view model for this page, right? But for the sake of this, I'm just literally going to pull from the web API using the data model from the web API, and I'm going to use that in my page here. So I'm going to create a public property called list, and I'm going to add employee here, and I'm going to call this employees, right? And I'm going to instantiate this so that it's instantiated by default, so it's never null. And it's giving me an error because it doesn't know where this object is. This object is currently in the server project. So again, in the wrong place. So this employee object, this model, we have to move this to the shared project. So let's do that. So now we have a models folder in the shared project, and we have the employee object in the shared folder. So now from the server project, we're going to delete this. Again, because the client application has no awareness of any of the data or objects in the server project. It only has a reference to the shared project. And so anytime we have an object that we want to share from the server and the client, we have to put it in the shared library. So now the path to this object is now Nuno Solutions employees.shared.models. So in order for this to be aware of it, we have to go into this imports folder, and we're going to add a new namespace like this, right? Because that's Nuno Solutions employees.shared.models, and that's what this is. That's where, and one important thing, the class has the namespace defined. So just because it's in this folder, it's not like a Razor component where automatically it takes the namespace of the folder path. If you have a namespace specified in here, you have to make sure it matches what you want. So in here, I'm going to change this to shared dot, and we're going to call this models, like that. So now you see that the squiggly lines went away from this import Razor page, and I think I have to build it. That's the problem. But let me just fix the database context class as well. It doesn't know where it is because it's going to be in the models. So we're going to add models in here so it knows where it is. I'm going to save. I'm just going to rebuild the solution. Make sure that it actually built here. I'm not sure why So shared models, you know, it's funny, but we put that in here. Okay, I see what I did. I'm an idiot. So I actually added the import into the client project, but our component is in the shared project. So the import.razor of the shared project is what needs that namespace, right? So we're gonna actually, I'm just gonna copy them from here. I'm gonna go into the import razor for the shared project. And now, because I added this namespace in here, the squiggly lines should be gone in here. See, now it recognizes the employee. You see what I'm saying?